You had practiced as part of the Hercule's at-sea training the various tasks involved in combat at sea. It was always a hypothetical thing in your mind's eye, though, somewhere off in the distance of fantasy and imagination, but never quite merging with reality. Until now. A lookout boy roughly 2 years your senior, but with much more military experience, had first spotted the presence of the French vessel in the distance with a scream of "Sail ho!" After trouble raising the signal initially, which had cost an able seaman his life, you were able to thrust the signal high, prompting the raising of your flag, to which the French ship hoisted her French colors. Then the yell went out, accompanied by the drum and fife beat to quarters.
All hands, clear the ship for action. Ahoy!
Those months of training had fascinated you in terms of how a ship of the line prepared for war. Bulkheads were knocked away, guns were released from their confinement, cannons placed into position, all the dread instruments of battle brought forth and readied. This included the guns which were shotted with additional matches lit for, and those boys with you in the masts and rigging who were a year or more younger than you were scrambling down to fulfill their roles during battle, that of powder monkeys. They would have the unenviable task of running gunpowder to the cannons from where it was stored, and as agile as they were, they could not hope to outrun cannon fire. Thankfully, your age of 16 and height meant you'd stay put in the heights and not join them. Still, you were justly terrified at the uncertainty of how things would play out. As fast as you were in the masts and rigging, you knew that you also could not outrun gun or cannon fire. Down below, the lieutenant passed through the ship preparing the Marines, who were all now armed with pikes, cutlasses, and pistols, should they have to board the enemy ship. Captain Hill's behind him yelling at the men to hold fast to courage and to bravery. Yelling up to you and the rest in the sails, he ordered the trimming readied as required. Those who manned the cannons below deck, they had the terrible job of dealing with noise so deafening it made many of the men temporarily or permanently deaf, with many of them succumbing to blood dripping from their ears during battles. The veterans tried to convince those who were still green to battle to go shirtless, instead tying their shirts and bandanas around their heads with the shirt holding the bandana stuffed into each ear. Their job was to man the 32-pound standard cannons on the Hercule. They were mounted on four-wheeled carriages and attached to ropes to prevent recoil pushing them too far. It took 7 men, and according to some of the seamen who had served generationally, not much had changed in many, many decades. First, the cartridge with powder placed into the muzzle, but not pierced, not quite yet. Then, wad rammed home. Heavy metal shot next inserted with its own wad. Finally, the gun captain cocked the gun lock and stood ready to pull the firing rope, which would let loose the shot towards the enemy ship. And there were several types of shot. Round standard shot to pummel through the hulls of ships and any men who happened to be standing on the other side. If those who were in close proximity were not hit directly, they were likely going to be hit by the myriad of splinter shards thrown about by the force of the shot smashing through the hull timber. Often, it was better to be hit directly by the shot than the splinters, which could horribly maim or kill a man very slowly. There was also anti-personnel shot. It was a canister-style shot with musket balls packed tightly inside that would spread its carnage in a wide radius blast. Bar shot was as it sounded, a metal bar connecting 2 cannonballs. It would be used to damage the masts of enemy ships. Finally, there was chain shot, 2 cannonball halves joined by a short metal chain which would spin hurl through the air and damage both sails and rigging. You remembered the lieutenant during your training yelling that your British ships used flint-locking fire mechanisms, whereas the Spanish and French still relied on fuses, which had a roughly 3-second delay. This meant if you and the crew acted fast, most times initiative would be on your side. The French ship was inching ever closer to the shore, with the Hercule giving chase. It was attempting to simultaneously outdistance your ship and put it nearer the shore to make pursuit more difficult. After an hour, at 9 a.m., your ship closed in with the order to fire a single ball shot. The shot hit its mark, as you could see with your youthful eyes, an explosion of wood and crushed timber where it had penetrated through. Captain Hills ordered the ship yet closer to the shore to better engage the French, but it was becoming clear the Hercule had less and less water under her keel, and the winds were becoming lighter and more erratic as well. The cannon fire continued to roar beneath you and in the distance as well. You and the others continued to manage the trimming throughout. You noted the French ship appeared to be firing less frequently, but the shots it did fire hit the side of the Hercule with devastating ferocity. Thankfully, they were not the 32-pounders the Hercule was firing, but damage was still being done. The Hercule was also hitting the mark, and though less frequently, its shots were more plentiful and capable of dealing much more damage. Up in your perch, working away to the orders below, you were thankful to not be on the French ship's gun crew. Then, your world began to unravel. The certainty of the moment, the certainty of the tasks at hand, replaced by organized chaos.
Mr. Hodge, we need you on the below 7th gun larboard, now. Yes, sir.
You replied, scrambling down in your usual quick fashion, but with a hesitation deep in your chest that to date you hadn't felt before. You quickly scrambled towards the stairs at a slightly bent angle, imagining shot was everywhere. Then a strange noise you hadn't heard before captured your attention and stopped you in your tracks. It sounded as if the very sails had been ripped by a giant looming above you, but upon looking up you realized the sails appeared intact, and the noise was the wind of the enemy's shot passing closely overhead. The roaring of cannon fire could now be heard from all parts of your trembling ship, and it continued to mingle with that of the French one in the distance, making hideous noises of timber being pulled back and forth. As you descended the stairs to the gun deck, you heard another shot strike the side of your ship, and the scene before you grew much more confused and horrible, like the worst storm experienced at sea, only just a few feet off the deck, with you in the midst of the thunder and the lightning. 2 more balls struck through the hull, splintering 2 of the 7 men manning the nearby cannon with timber shards. You tore your shirt off quickly as the veterans had advised, first tearing the bandana in 2, and then plugging your ears as full as you could stuff them, then tying the shirt all around like an oversized version of the bandana. But even with this added protection, each successive shot fired rung in your ears. As you approached the 7th larboard gun, you could hear the cries of the wounded seamen being dragged away to the cockpit. Seeing wounded to either side cannon as well, you fell back instinctively on your training and began to juggle the required cartridges between the 3 guns to the best of your ability. During this, one of the lads, an Irishman named Dahi Lees on the cannon to the right that you'd also been supplying, was struck in the leg by a large shot and carried away for what everyone, including you, knew would be a certain amputation. On and on the battle raged, with no decisive blows being dealt by either side. The men kept cheering, and you along with them, although you questioned why, and merely joined in to not be the odd one out. Was this the thought of the other men as well? You certainly weren't feeling very inspirational amidst the noise and constant bombardment. Looking down at the deck for the first time, you see it is coated in a torrent of red, as if the area had been splashed with a large amount of red dye. Looking up, the contrast was what most stood out to you. You all attempted to make the best of the situation as you acted instinctively, pushing the serious thoughts to the back of your mind. The only course of action, to fight bravely and as cheerfully as you could muster, even if on the outside only. You had grown up without any real religious training or indoctrination, but with every man who fell wounded, that feeling you might soon be before the judge of the whole earth overcame you. You repeated the Lord's Prayer over and over, even promising that if spared, you would be more attentive to religious duties. This was a promise that at the time you had no doubt planned on keeping. But in later years, you'd learned it was easier to make promises in the midst of hell on earth than to keep them when peace was once again restored and danger mercifully absent. It seemed as if the fighting had raged for a full day, but in truth, it had only been 2 very, very slow hours, and the cry ran out that the hour was now near 11. And then, within a few minutes of that, the French guns fell silent. You were once again with some of the others called back on deck to work in the heights. As you climbed up, you could see for the first time the damage that the French ship had suffered. But still, its colors flew proudly. And then it happened. The winds had fallen dramatically, and all that remained were the gusts of wind, very light, coming from the shore. This would make it difficult for the much larger Hercule to navigate properly. Then, the French ship began to turn, much quicker than any on the Hercule had anticipated, including your captain. Soon, the ship was in perfect position to rake the Hercule, and rake she did. The French ship, which had until now sparingly used what was likely a much more limited supply of shot, let loose with a full, devastating broadside at the Hercule's stern. That sound that you earlier thought was tearing sail was back all around you, only this time it did tear sail and rigging, and you could instantly spot the difference. Below, multiple explosions of timber where the broadside met the Hercule's stern. The French ship was able to pass and continue on to the safety of Mole Saint-Nicolas, while the Hercule was dangerously close to running aground. And that is where we end part 5. I want to thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did making it. If you did, please hit the like button. If you enjoyed the content on this channel but haven't yet, please consider subscribing. I'd love to have you on board. And as I always say, until the next video, cheers.